welcome everyone who's joining us today on CMT Connect and also on Zoom, on Facebook Live. I know we have, there's been a lot of buzz about this app, and we've had a lot of questions and excitement in the community. So we thought we'd, have a little chat with you and answer any questions that have been arising, and just talk a little bit more about the exciting new app you have here.
Well, that sounds good. Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be talking with everyone today, and hopefully this is informative, but also interactive. So we're going to have some questions and answers at the end, I know. But before then, we've got some introduction to give people to this study we're running.
Yes, and let's first give you your formal introduction. You are Mark Larkin of Vita Access. You are the founder as well as the developer for the CMT&Me app. So yeah, take it from there. I'll let you introduce us to some of what we'll be talking about today.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, and as you said, that's my background. And at Vita Access, we specialize in doing these types of studies, what we call real-world evidence studies. So they're scientific studies, but they're not quite the same as clinical studies. They're designed to run in the real world, find out how diseases, treatments affect patients in the real-world setting. So we're going to be introducing the study that we've set up with the international study that we've set up called CMT&Me, which uses a smartphone app. We'll take you through a bit of that, how the study's been set up, what the objectives are, what the countries are, what sort of data we're going to be collecting, and what's sort of in it for the participants as well, because they're the key building blocks of this.
Absolutely. So yeah, moving along, we have our outline for today's webinar. If we could
yeah, let me just go down.
Pop that up on the screen there. And for those of you using Zoom for the first time, it's pretty simple. And also we'll be taking your live questions. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A box down there. So feel free to share your questions or comments on there. And then also on Facebook Live under the feed, we'll have our team looking through those questions and comments, and we'd love to interact with you live today. And yeah, so and then at the end of today's webinar, we'll also be making sure we dive into all those questions and give you some information for contacting Mark. Yeah, so let's move along. Okay, so as a patient with CMT, I was diagnosed at the age of 3. So, for someone who's lived their entire life with CMT, I think one of the reasons why seeing this new app and our new registry coming to fruition is that we really feel like we're making progress here. I think a lot of us feel hopeless as we're trying to wait around for treatment, and a lot of times we're not sure if we can play a part in making that happen sooner, or just contributing to research in our everyday lives. So I think this is incredibly valuable and exciting to see that patients are really starting to become acknowledged, and these platforms are allowing our patients to communicate what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And the Global Registry for Inherited Neuropathies, GRIN, is a platform we just launched a few months ago with HNF. It's our own platform, and then CMT&Me app as well this year. So it's super exciting. These are central hubs for CMT patient data that we've never had before. And I like to think of them as the watering holes for researchers and treatment developers. This is where they're going to be gathering that vital data to understand, what treatments need to be developed, the urgency, the symptoms, and just everything that's included in this, monumental process of developing effective treatments as soon as possible for our community. So I like to just start off by really communicating how important this is to our community. I know it's exciting and it's cool to have, some new technology and an app on your phone, but it's really the driving force behind, what will become future treatments for us, and hopefully sooner than later. So thank you.
Okay, so should we have a look at how GRIN and CMT&Me fit together then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
They
we've
all complementary.
yeah, absolutely. So we've put together this table. Hopefully, everyone can see this. That explains some of the differences, and there are unique capabilities for each. They've got slightly different objectives, and we'd love it if patients joined both, actually. So here you've got a sort of side-by-side table. You can see if you want extra information, and we haven't got time to go into all of the details of these two projects on this webinar, but there's a URL at the top there that you can click on to have a look at each of them in a bit more detail. And underneath, we've really summarized some of the differences between them. So CMT&Me, it's an international observational study. Observational means that we don't give new drug to participants. We're seeing what's happening in the real world. We're observing them. Right. So that's an observational study, CMT&Me. It happens to be to use a smartphone app to generate the data to interact with patients, and we'll tell you more a little about that. Whereas the GRIN is available through the web. It's, again, as Estella said, it's developing a very detailed data set in the real world setting about patients with CMT, particularly looking in a lot of detail about symptoms, GRIN, and it's identifying gaps in understanding of how CMT affects people. And it's also very key focus of GRIN is looking at capturing genomics. Okay, so I'd really encourage everyone to go, and if they haven't done already, to click on the link there and go and find out a little bit more about GRIN. Similarly, you've got the link there for the CMT&Me app, and that's also generating a real-world data set to understand better about CMT&Me. It's a resource for the research community. It's been sponsored by a drug developer that some of you may have heard of called Pharnex, who's got a drug in late-stage development that'll be coming onto the market, relatively soon. Mm-hmm. And key part of this is because this project's done digitally, researchers for CMT can apply to have a look at the data. So they apply to, as you see there, scientific advisory boards, SAB, that's been set up to cover the governance of that project. And and again, you'll see the form there. There's an online form which researchers can use to access that data. So these are pretty collaborative projects and designed to help the research community.
Absolutely. It's very exciting.
Okay.
Yes, so tell us a little bit about what the specific goal of this app is and what you're looking to accomplish with it.
Sure. Okay. Well, what we've done on this next slide, I've just sort of copy pasted the objective from the study protocol. Now, as I said, this is an observational study. It's a scientific study, and that means what we do when we set it up, we write a very detailed recipe, if you like, or a study protocol that sets out the objectives for the study, the data we're going to capture, how long it is, which countries, things like that. And I'll let you read this, which is taken from the protocol. But broadly, what we're trying to do is understand how, using the smartphone technology that people can hopefully integrate into their daily lives, how CMT affects people in a longitudinal way. One of the great things about a smartphone app is that we can get repeated data measures. So we're not asking participants things just once. We can ask them things repeatedly to find out how things change over time. And that's really powerful. So that's what we're going to be doing, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the countries that are within the studies, because again, one of the really exciting things about studies like this that we can now do with new technology is being able to pull the data across different countries, essentially trying to have the same approach across a range of different countries. And then because we're able to have a big pool of patients, that's a really powerful tool to understand what the disease looks like, about different aspects of it affecting different patients, different types of patients. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So once the patient is entering their information, how is it being used, for the specifics of clinical trials or treatments? I mean, how is it being presented and delivered to these researchers and industry?
Yeah, great question. So first thing to say is data are anonymized. So if participants do have to provide some personal healthcare information, personal identifiable information, that never goes to researchers. Researchers aren't interested in that personal stuff. They're interested in aggregated data of people. So that we in my company, one of the things we do is anonymize the data. So when that's happened, those data are really useful to for the scientific community. So actually, although unfortunately CMT is a very common rare disease, it remains a rare disease. And the literature, the scientific literature about it is relatively poor. So there's still quite a lot of gaps in how CMT affects patients, the various aspects of the condition, such as limb function, quality of life, fatigue, sleep. There's a whole range, as many of you will be very much aware, there's a whole range of ways that the condition affects patients. So some of those aren't very well understood still. So this project's going to be looking at understanding those better. Also, with trying to publish those data, right? We've tried to set it up with a lot of rigor for publications in peer-reviewed journals, for instance. So that's going to be an important part, publishing the data that we generate. It's also going to raise awareness of CMT, and it's also going to help with the development of an approval, we hope, of new CMT treatments, such as the one I mentioned for Farnext a few minutes ago.
And it's not even just limited to researchers, in the traditional form of developing drugs and so forth. I mean, it can be looked at, from the perspective of exercise studies or medical equipment, or just things that in general have the capacity to improve somebody's quality of life and their function on a day-to-day basis. So
yeah, it's really patient-centric. So you're absolutely right. We're not just asking questions that are sort of more, I don't know, scientific or medical. We're also interested in things that are impacting just people's daily lives. So things like, as examples, how far do people go, to receive treatment? Well, from where they live to seeing a specialist, perhaps. How frequently do they see specialists? What's the impact on their professional life of their CMT? So there's a whole range of things. It's not just medical, it's sort of social, if you like, as well.
Yeah, and I mean, patients with CMT, we have our good days and our bad days. So I love the ability to really capture how you're feeling that day, what symptoms you're experiencing, on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis, because that definitely has, that fluctuates.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. So anyone who's actually already started the study or is going to enroll and download the study app, one of the things you might think is, when I'm responding to questions, should I say what I'm, if they're asking me how I feel today, should I say today? But what if I feel sometimes, different from today? Well, you should always just tell us how it is today. Remember, it's a long-term study, so we're going to pick out all those good days and the bad days. We're going to have a lot of patients as well. So the idea is all of that big group of patients will give us a really valuable and accurate understanding of how things do change. But yeah, just always be truthful, if you like, about how things are affecting you, when you're answering the questions.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So I know you mentioned the data is protected, but can you go a little bit more in detail on how it's protected, what researchers can see, what they can't see? Can they contact you and that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, data and the protection of participants is fundamentally important. That's probably the most important thing. It's the starting point for these types of studies. So my company, we've developed a platform for doing this sort of work, which we call My Real World. There's plenty of information on our company website about that, vitaccess.com. And we've developed that with the principles of things like General Data Protection Regulation. That's a framework that applies in the EU. HIPAA, that some of you will be familiar with in the US. So they're guiding principles to protect patients and security and the confidentiality of their data.
Yeah.
As I said before, the key thing that researchers want is not actually individual patient identifiable information. So we anonymize the data before they go to a research portal, and that's part of our platform as well. It's where researchers can log in, look at the data, but when the data are transferred to that research portal for them to explore and analyze, they've already been anonymized in various ways. So there's no danger of any personal identifiable information being viewed by researchers. And in addition to that, we've got a very robust, gold standard system where for the security of our servers and encryption and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know it makes sense. They're looking for the big picture. They're not really interested
Exactly. Yeah,
in
exactly.
individual patient. Okay. And so, we know patient collaboration was a big part of developing this app. Can you tell us why it was so important and exactly how and where you collaborated with the foundations and the advocacy groups?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really exciting things of a project like this. And anyone who participates will know that they're part of an international study. So I'll tell you about a little bit more about the various component countries that are starting this off. But essentially, this is an international consortium of patient advocacy organizations and key opinion leaders, clinical key opinion leaders, who've worked with us on the development of this project, helping us to understand what are the right questions to ask if they're well targeted to the CMT community, giving us advice about the sort of look and the feel of the study app. When we're thinking about symptoms and tracking and offering the ability to track symptoms, making sure we offer the ability to track the right symptoms, the ones that are relevant for CMT patients. So that's been really valuable. I mean, what we call that the approach that we have, which is very sort of patient-centric. We call that sort of co-creation. So the patients and patient advocacy groups are really important stakeholders in the development of the project. So that as some examples, for instance, right at the beginning of the project, we reached out to various different patient advocacy organizations across the different countries within the scope of the project. We explained to them our plans for the study, have individual calls with them. And then during those individuals calls, this is quite a big study and there's quite a lot to it. So we said to them, you know what, the best thing is for you to all come over and meet. We'll all meet together. We did that in Europe in the spring. We had a day-long session, a sort of onboarding workshop is what we call it. And we explained to them the plans in a lot of detail. They get to meet all the other advocacy organizations, many of whom they know already, of course. They give us their feedback, and that was really, really valuable. So that helped us hone our plans for this project. And then the other thing I'd just mention is that the sort of the governance for these projects is really important. So that's important to protect patients, to have scientific rigor. And one of the things we did was set up a scientific advisory board that oversees this project. So it's not my company or Farnext who's has responsibility for making decisions. We're on that scientific advisory board, but there's representation from all of the patient advocacy organizations and the clinical key opinion leaders in each country. So if I just move on to this slide here, you'll see that there's the starting point for the study is 6 countries. So the US, then UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain. And those are you see there's a consortium of patient advocacy organizations there. We're lucky enough to be working with 2 patient advocacy organizations in the US, Hereditary Neuropathy Foundation and also CMTA. But in the other countries, there's 1 per country. So we all met these folks earlier in the year on the onboarding session, and they've been really closely involved in the launch of the development and launch of the project in each of those countries.
And so the app is available in each one of these countries?
It's available, actually, it's a good point. So there's, we do staggered launches, actually. So it's available in the US and the UK already. And I should also say it's iOS and Android. So it works on both types of smartphones. The other countries, European countries, Spain, Italy, Germany, and France are coming in the sort of coming weeks. What I'd encourage people to do is follow the CMT&Me Twitter page, and that's a great source of information, and we'll be updating that with timings of those launches in other countries. And the other thing to say is that that's just a starting point. If things go well, there's the possibility of perhaps expanding it to other countries, but this is just these 6 countries are the starting point. And I should also mention something about what that looks like in those other countries. So in each of those countries, we localize the study app. So that means it's in local language or languages, if there's more than one in a given country. And then we do some things like linguistic validation, forward translation, back translation, to make sure that a participant in any country is as comfortable as they can be when they're using the study app. So from a language perspective, from a cultural perspective, etc.
Yeah, it's really remarkable.
Okay.
Okay, so can you remind us again how long ago you launched the app and how many patients you've enrolled so far?
Yeah, well, let me show you a little graph here. Hopefully everyone can see this. So this graph shows the number of days along the horizontal axis. You see days post-launch. Now, we launched this on the 9th of October. So this is still pretty young, and it's a long-term study. It's going to be about 2.5 years initially. But as I said before, if it's valuable, if we're getting great data out of it, I'm sure we'd like to extend it beyond that. But the initial plan is 2.5 years. Now, here on the vertical axis, you see the total number of participants enrolled. And as I said a minute ago, we've got the US and the UK launch. So what you see here is the US in green, nice gradual growth. And we had about 40 days, we had a big upspurt. And so this is a little bit out of date. So we're probably a bit more. So we have about, I don't know, 250 participants in the US. And the UK, we had a huge number of initial participants, and then we sort of flatlined a little bit. That means the overall curve is we're just about over 600 at the moment. And you know, for people not too familiar with this sort of work, those are really great numbers. I mean, this is, as I said before, unfortunately, it's a relatively common rare disease, but it's pretty unusual to be able to recruit that many people that quickly as well. So we're pretty happy with that.
That would be
as a start.
Absolutely, it's a great start, and it's encouraging to see, and hopefully we'll be seeing those numbers spike up even more after the webinar today, and you know, our future.
Yeah, I mean, when we were planning the study and developing it, you can never really be sure for this type of study exactly how many patients you're going to get. We want as many as possible. There's not a formal target as there are in clinical trials, which is based on powering of, you know, the effect size you're hoping to see. It's essentially trying to get as many patients as possible. So we've got a rough goal of about 2,000 patients across those 6 countries. And, you know, based on this really strong start, I think we should, fingers crossed, comfortably reach that. But, you know, if we get to 2,000, then we're going to be sitting around with all the other people in the consortium and saying, well, can we get to 3,000? Was that possible? You know, and if we can, back to the value of this, that just gives us such a valuable tool to investigate from a scientific perspective how this disease is affecting people, on a daily basis.
Right. I mean, the higher the number of enrollments, basically, the more reliable the information, the more clear.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing, so to try and give you a little flavor of that, if you're asking a question about the whole of the cohort, the population, and you might have 2,000 people, then that's probably going to be a decent number to get some understanding of that. But we're asking lots of questions, so we could perhaps think about trying to investigate the what's happening in quite small subpopulations. So it might be patients of a certain age in a certain country who've been using a certain type of treatment, who might have had a certain subtype. And when the more sort of filters that we apply, the smaller the subgroup you get. So if you've got a very big starting point, that gives you the best chance of being able to understand about the subgroups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely paints a clearer picture for
Yeah,
some of the more rare types of CMT also that we have very little information and data on. So
of course.
very exciting for them.
Yeah.
Okay. So how long is this particular study, will this particular study last, and will there be future studies, and what are your long-term sights on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the initial plan is 2.5 years, and that's based on a period of what's called accrual, where you add different countries. So that started in October, and that's going to, maybe the last countries are going to go through in the initial scope is going to be about sort of perhaps March time, something like that. And then once all those countries are up, we've got another 2 years where everyone's up and running, and we'll be looking at the data. Now, if the data are good, if we get loads of patients, I mean, that's because it's such a valuable resource, there'll be a question about whether we can extend it. And for those who've already downloaded the study app and enrolled, as we say that to participants right from the beginning, that it's an initial period of a couple of years, but if everything goes well, we'd love to extend it. So you never really know with these sorts of studies, but it would be wonderful if we were able to extend that.
And participants can join at any time.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, very good question. Yeah, of course. That's a great point. So yeah, they can join at any time. So both anyone who's joining late, that's not in any way less valuable than someone who's on early. The reality is also that some people you might perhaps join early then stop, or any we're just interested in any data really. So if people stop and don't do anything for a while, but then start interacting with the app again, we're very happy to have that. Obviously, we want people to be doing it the whole time, but if for whatever reason they stop for a while, doesn't matter, we'd love to have them back. And similarly, if people join only halfway through, that's still really valuable.
Absolutely. Okay. So
okay,
let's have a look here at what for those of you who have not downloaded the app yet, what some of the features are, what the visuals are, and how it plays out on screen.
Yeah, so basically a key part of the app is responding to surveys. No, most of those I hope you'll find very simple, but they're multiple choice questions, so there's not really free text, it's mostly multiple choice. So these are different instruments which are scientifically, medically validated. So we haven't created these ourselves, we've used them because how they work is well known in the scientific literature. So there's quite a lot of variability in these, and sometimes because they've been made by other people, we have to really stick quite close to exactly how they're presented on the screen. So here you see a couple of examples of that. This is a very simple question about self-care. What happened today? So for instance, I had no problems washing or dressing myself, through to I'm unable to wash or dress myself. Okay, so very simple question, multiple choice. You highlight the one that applies to you, and you carry on. Here's another very simple question. It's a slider here. You tap the scale to indicate how your health is today. So 100, best health you can imagine. down to 0, the worst health you can imagine. Again, it's very, that's those questions. So it's typically it's one question per screen on your device, and each of the surveys made up of multiple questions, and they could take you anything from just a couple of minutes to reply to perhaps 5-8 minutes for a longer one. But when you're prompted, and within the study app you get a prompt as to which ones we'd like you to do, so you don't have to sort of remember which one you should be doing. When the app will tell you, and then it will tell you how long it'll take to do it as well.
It's pretty painless. I mean, I've been using it myself for since you launched, and it's very user friendly. Like you said, that you don't have to kind of keep track of it. It's very automated, and whatever surveys you haven't completed, they're up at the top highlighted, and then when a new survey comes up, it notifies you. So it's definitely very user friendly, and I haven't had any issues with it at all using it. So
good, glad to hear it.
Yeah. So I think you touched on this. How often should you update your information? I mean, how many of the surveys, or what percentage of the surveys are recurring, and how many are less frequent?
Yeah, well, so yeah, we've touched on the fact that there's in-app notifications, so that we've done thinking prior to launch about the frequency with which we'd like people to complete the surveys, and that actually reflects the topic that the survey is about. So some things change quite quickly. Some sort of symptoms or aspects of CMT might change a little bit more regularly. Others don't change that regularly, so you don't really need to ask about those that frequently. So the surveys that participants complete after these in-app notifications, some are monthly, some are quarterly, some are 6 monthly. So yeah, there's a bit of background work that's gone on to decide which is the appropriate frequency, and that's done, as I said. That was one of the discussions in the workshop that we did with the patient groups, but we've also got input from the clinical experts about that as well. And one thing to actually point out to any participants is, you might think that sometimes when you're completing a survey, well, I did that one last month or a while ago and nothing's changed. So is that of any value? Well, the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
So as I said right at the beginning, one of the real advantages of doing a digital study like this with an app is we can ask these things repeatedly over time. So that allows us to build up a picture of how, I don't know, something like health-related quality of life, changes over time, and actually being able to get repeated measures. And even if that's all, you're a patient that hasn't changed, that's just as valuable as you giving us data that things change on a monthly basis. So don't worry if you think it's the same answers you're giving us as when you did last time. It's just as valuable.
Absolutely, yeah. It communicates, whether you're stable as well, and I find it helpful just for myself to self-evaluate and really take a moment in my day and see where I might be struggling that day, or where I'm feeling, like when I'm feeling good, and maybe make the connection to why. Oh, well, I'm functioning better today. Maybe it's because I had a better, healthier diet that day, or I went to the gym, or just those small details that kind of help you self-reflect as well, just for your personal use.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so in addition to that, what are some other bonuses that patients can take away from this app?
Yeah, well, so far we've been talking a lot about data and how valuable that is. Well, what we should also think about is what's in it for the participant. Okay, and we've built in a couple of features into the study app, which again in collaboration with the patient advocacy groups, the patients themselves, some features which we hope will be useful to participants to help them manage their CMT. Now, people do that in different ways, of course. But these are things we call condition management features. So a couple of examples of things we've built in already. There's a symptom tracker. So very simply, you have the ability to track a range of symptoms, and then they're recorded, and then you can you can share those, show those to your family, your clinical team. You can get a PDF to summarize those, and you can send that to, you can do anything you like with those. But that's, we won't be looking at the data from those symptoms. That's entirely for the participant. And by the way, of course, these are voluntary. You don't have to use these at all, but we hope that that's a nice useful tool for tracking symptoms.
Yeah.
Secondly, there's a what we call a knowledge feature, where again we've worked in partnership with patient groups to provide some validated information about CMT, about treatments, about how it impacts people. So it's not just simply Google information. So within the app, you've got a nice resource where you can find information about CMT. The other point I wanted to make is, as this is a long-term project, those condition management features are just a starting point. We're going to be launching others in 2019. So a little sneak preview of those is we plan to have a community feature where, again, all of this is if only if people want to use them, don't have to use them at all. But if what people want to, they'll be able to reach out, contact other CMT patients, see if you can find another CMT inpatient, for instance, in your own neighborhood, has a similar sort of profile as you, and reach out to them, share some, some tips, or just meet for a coffee perhaps. So we've launched that in other projects that we've done, and that's been, we've had great feedback from participants as well on the use of that.
I love that idea. I mean, just finding somebody, in your neighborhood. A lot of times, a lot of us have Facebook or social media acquaintances, but they might be, in another state or in another country. So is this a feature that we would opt into? I mean, it's something that—
Yeah, exactly. So it's all completely optional. So we'd explain, if you said you wanted to use it, you clicked on it for the first time, we'd provide more information about that. It's entirely optional, as I said. Yeah, and that was when we started that in another project. That was based on the fact that people, they're on Facebook and Twitter, but actually those are often quite big groups, and you can't really necessarily filter those. You can ask questions of those, but you typically have to ask the whole group. And this was some people wanting to have the ability to do something a little bit more locally.
Yeah, it's a very exciting feature. And I know you're definitely open for feedback from the community, and if it's something that you'd be open to suggestions
Would
from—
love that. Yeah, I would love that. So, there's a dedicated email address, CMT at VitAccess, which is VIT. You can see it in the top, our logo in the top of the screen there, VIT ACCESS. So CMT at vitaccess.com. But any, suggestions, we'd love to hear from people.
Great. Yeah, I think that's super exciting, because the patients are often the experts on what what they're looking for. So
of course, yeah.
Okay. And so I know we have a lot of families with CMT. So can the app be, one account be used per family, or is it individual only?
Yeah, it's individual only. So the reason is that we're going to be asking a lot of questions about the profile of the participants. So if people are then multiple people in the same account are providing answers to surveys, we wouldn't be able to know who that applied to, if you like. So it's one patient per account, if you like. So, but we'd love to have multiple people from the same family. That's very interesting. But in that situation, they'd have to sort of have a separate login, a separate account.
And this is for 18 and over only?
Yeah, exactly. So I should have mentioned that earlier. It's adults only at the moment. There may be the possibility of getting data from people younger than 18, but for the moment, we're starting with adults only, I'm afraid.
Okay, no, that's a good place to start. And I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are a lot of CMT, patients excited and eager to participate in clinical studies. How can an app like this kind of connect them to clinical studies, or can, the sites contact the patients for potential study enrollment?
Well, it's not formally as such like that. I mean, it's this study is really about helping the scientific community understand about CMT, which that's got a whole read across to the development of new treatments and clinical trials. One of the things we're going to do is be able to understand a little bit more about CMT subtypes, where they are, for instance, which could be useful from an epidemiological perspective, and that also could be useful in thinking about the feasibility of sort of clinical trial recruitment. Yeah. So there's a range of possibilities, and it's all very closely linked to, although it's not a clinical study, as I said at the beginning, but it's very linked to the development of new treatments and clinical studies as well.
Yeah, I definitely I see that the demographic part of it being valuable as well, as far as the industry deciding on where to locate the sites. If they see, it might be de-identified, but they might be able to see, a higher concentration of a certain type of CMT in one area of the country, and
Yeah, and the other thing to just say, which we haven't touched upon, is we can get, because this is a digital study, there's no paper anywhere really. Even the informed consent, which is very detailed and rigorous, it's all done electronically. Because it's all electronic, we can get the data out really quickly, and that means, again, it's very valuable. So what researchers see, there's a bit of a lag of maybe 3 hour, number of hours between people providing data and being able to analyze those data. But the fact that's real-time data, and again, we haven't been able to do this historically, that's really valuable. So as a tool,
there's no time gap there, and getting the information as directly from the patients that same day. So that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've reached our portion of the webinar for questions from our viewers. So I see a few here. The first one from Tara Jones: is CMT&Me open to anyone who identifies as having CMT, even those without an official clinical diagnosis?
Correct. That's absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, one thing to say about, and you'll see when we, there's a lot of questions, so we're able to, understand what people's background is, their subtype, etc. Now, we want to be as broad as possible. So it's not just about CMT1A, it's all sorts of different subtypes. And, we don't ask you for things like, scanning a letter to sort of prove that your diagnosis. So we want as broad a cross-section of people as we can get.
Okay. And for the, for back to the topic of families who have the app, is there a way to link their apps together, or not yet?
No, there's not a way to do that yet. That's an interesting question. So for instance, if we had 2 to 3 different family members, they would all have, and they wanted to participate, they would all have their own separate logins and accounts with their questions that the answers they provide us. We might be able to infer that they're family members, and certainly we'll see that they live in a very similar area. But yeah, we haven't linked the accounts as such.
Okay. And then I think our last question is, how long does it take to get through the study? So I know each survey has its own specific amount of time, but I mean, really not long. I mean, for me, it's something that you can do while you're waiting online for your lunch, or you're stuck in traffic or at a red light, or I mean, it's super convenient.
I mean, exactly right. So we, again, when we were developing this, we were very conscious that we shouldn't be unreasonable about what we were asking participants to do in terms of time. Everyone, is very busy, obviously. So as part of the collaboration with the patients, the patient advocacy groups, we presented some ideas about that, and each time we presented different surveys and the frequency with which we'd like people to complete them. We also, added up the number of minutes that would take, so to try and make sure we're not being unreasonable. So I think approximately it might be something like, I mean, and Estelle, you might have a better idea, but when we were estimating this, it's in the order of around perhaps 20-30 minutes a month, something like that.
Okay,
so
that's very doable.
Yeah, hopefully that's very doable.
Absolutely. Okay, and then I think we have another question coming up here. How specific do you get in classification of subtypes? So I know you mentioned, it's more on the general side, but just touching back again on GRIN, on the Global Registry at H&F, that's something that we dive into deeper as well. So whether it's on the, CMT&Me app or GRIN, that's addressed.
Yeah, I haven't got the study protocol in front of me to give you a full answer to that, but we certainly do ask half a dozen subtypes, I think, from memory, and if that the person who's asking that question wants to drop an email to cmt@vitaccess.com, I'd be delighted to get back with the exact question about with all of the possible answers that we go into in the study.
Okay. And will there be the capability to share in a community setting if you have questions for others that have completed the survey? So I think that kind of touches on the goal you have for creating, connecting patients and participants next year.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something that if people want to do when they join a community feature and just meet up with someone else, they can do that. Now, we want to be clear, however, that we're not, it's that community feature is not a moderated sort of forum. I know there are other ones that exist that do that. What we're trying to do is simply put people together if they want to be put together. If after that happens, they want to, communicate on WhatsApp or other, means, that's entirely up to them. We're not trying to follow that that interaction, that discussion. That's entirely up to them. We just think that this might be a nice way of, if people want to, putting them together.
Right. That initial
initial contact. Yeah.
Okay. And this is something also, will participants have access to their data from the study? If so, how do we inquire?
Well, that's a great question. So there's a few different aspects to the answer of that. So one is when you're asking, when participants are completing surveys, you don't have access to the previous answers you gave, because that could bias you when you're doing them the next time round. So from a scientific perspective, we don't do that. There's a good reason for that. What we're going to hopefully introduce is another feature where there's sort of tagging of the survey, so you'll be able to see, we hope, your history of all of the surveys you've done, whether you've read, you've used the knowledge feature or things of that nature. So you'll be able to see what you've been doing within the app. There is, as I said before, we're using the symptom tracker. There, if you wanted to track all whatever symptoms you wanted on a sort of daily basis, you have access to all of that, and that could be, I mean, that's one of the real goals of that function, that feature, is to be able to, for patients to be able to have the data themselves, to look back on it, on their symptoms, to share that with their family, their friends, their clinical team, because sometimes when again, feedback from patients, when people the clinical team asks a patient, what's a certain symptom been like since I last saw you, can be quite tricky to reconstruct that. Things change on a daily basis, but actually tracking it on is a good way of doing that. So you can do that within the app. Now, additionally, if as is consistent with the principles of things like GDPR in the EU. If a participant decides for whatever reason they want to stop, they don't need to do anything. But if they then say, oh, I want to remove my data that's contributed to this, they can do that as well.
Okay.
They just need to tell us.
They have that option.
Yeah.
And then I know we touched a little bit about the access to researchers, but I just like to again highlight that you are also open to students and other members of of the community applying for access to view the data.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you can still see my screen, can you still see my screen here?
Yes. Yes,
yeah, so I've got this is our website, the VitaAccess website, and there's lots of information about this study here. And as I said right at the beginning, it's very collaborative. So if there's people who have a sort of research project in mind, they can go to our website. They can go to data access. They can then see some information, and you'll see that there's for CMT&Me, there's a data request form. So for that, you can put in your details, your sort of credentials, if you like, your research question down the bottom here, and then that will go to our scientific advisory board, who will make the decision about whether access, whether access can be offered. And that's consistent with many traditional registries where you can access the data, you have to apply for it, etc. Because there's a little bit of work required to grant access to that data. So, having a form like that seems a good way of doing it.
Absolutely. And then we just had some quick questions from Carol. I think we already answered this one, but just to reiterate, to enroll in CMT&Me, how old do you have to be? That's 18 and over.
18 over, yep.
But then do you have to know your subtype to enroll? No, right?
No, you don't have to know subtype, but that's a great question. If there is, you can enroll without knowing your subtype. There's, that question you can say don't know. But then later on, if in the future during the study you do find out what your subtype is, you can go back and we can update your details.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we answered a good amount of questions here. We definitely have a clearer picture of the importance of this app and GRIN as well, and why patient participation really matters.
Yeah.
And, something as small as a survey, an app on your phone can really impact the speed and the efficiency of treatment development across the board. So I really am grateful for your hard work in developing this app. It really means a lot to our community, and it just really brings a lot of hope for accelerated progress. And yeah, kudos to you and your team.
Well, thank you very much. I'd really emphasize that we won't get anywhere without the help of participants. So it's a really interesting time at the moment where technology has advanced so that individual patients can participate in this sort of research. And on an individual basis, we hope that using our study app is useful to people, but actually knowing that you're part of an international study with potentially thousands of CMT patients across the world, hopefully that's bringing one's personal contribution to that. That's a great thing to do, and we're very grateful to everyone's help.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have the power to be part of the progress. So thank you once again, and I encourage everyone, if they have not yet, to download the CMT&Me app, and also check out the Global Registry for Inherited Neuropathies on neuropathyreg.org. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us, reach out on Facebook or on our website, hnf-cure.org, or VitaAccess, which we have here on the screen, info@vitaaccess.com. So thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing the newest developments as we move forward with this app into 2019.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Estella. Great to talk to you, and thanks for all the questions, and thanks for everyone tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.